into the Bible, you see the first Christian community in the Acts of the Apostles. They are called the people of the new way. What was their new way? Or in Antioch, for the first time, they were called Christians, because what made them different? They included not only Jews, but also people with pagan, Hellenistic background. So any community of believers, any religious congregation always and necessarily consists of people who bring with them their own cultural background, even if they are united under the same roof of one religion. They come with their diverse cultural background. Now, the next element of religion, cult, here you can already see cult has the same linguistic root as culture, culture. Cult, also cult, like what is cult? The liturgy, we would call it, the vestments, the gestures you make, the language you use. All this is culturally grown and a conditioned form of communication, culturally conditioned form of communication. And now, arguably the most important component of religion, the creed. Also, the creed is not supra-cultural. The what of belief is transmitted to us in mental concepts, in a certain language. That means to say, in a certain culture. I like to do a little thought experiment. When Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" Peter said, "The Messiah, you are the Messiah." Well, that answer made perfect sense in the Jewish religious and cultural context. Messiah, it's not only a word, it is a whole concept. Now, imagine Peter had answered to Jesus' question, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter says, with the words of Karl Rahner, "You are the incarnate Logos, consubstantial with the Father, the second person of the immanent and economic Trinity." I think the historical Jesus of Nazareth would have been pretty astonished. Yeah, because this answer makes sense in a different context, Hellenistic conceptual world of thought. So, who believes, how we believe, and what we believe, all of it comes in a cultural wrap-up. Culture, therefore, plays an important role also in our faith, often subconscious and not acknowledged. To fully understand our faith, I say, requires that we understand our culture and the dynamics of culture. In the last century, much emphasis was laid on inculturation. Inculturation of the gospel was much talked about in missionary circles. Reflecting on inculturation, however, has made us aware that there is no such thing as the pure gospel, a gospel message that you could somehow distill from its historical and cultural expressions. The good news is a message. It's an act of communication, and every message has a language, a grammar, a sound, a visual appearance, mental concepts. In other words, every message, every act of communication comes in a cultural body, and it does not exist apart from this body. So the gospel, the pure gospel, without a cultural body doesn't exist. This is true, of course, also for the Bible. The Word of God is a cultural product. Certain time, certain language, certain society. Think of the Old Testament, patriarchal society, tribal society of nomads and desert dwellers. St. Paul writes his letters to city dwellers, and he refers to different realities, the realities of slaves, of urban life, of men and women, context of persecution, and so on. So reading the Bible, whether Old or New Testament, is by definition an intercultural encounter. But Christianity is not a book religion, but an incarnational religion. God incarnate in a human being, Jesus of Nazareth. That means also God incarnate in a cultural human condition, a sex, a gender, a time in history, and a culture. So even the encounter with God incarnate is an intercultural encounter. We cannot have Jesus without his culture. So this insight has shifted the focus from inculturation to interculturation. That is especially true now that the whole church has embarked on the synodal journey. The synodal pathway has more than ever brought home to us that local church cultures differ. But how far may cultural diversity go in the church? Where is the border between the faith that is normative for all and legitimate cultural diversity? At the end of the Synod on the Family in 2015, Pope Francis said, "We have seen that what seems normal for a bishop on one continent is considered strange and almost scandalous for a bishop from another continent. What is considered a violation of a right in one society is an evident and inviolable rule in another. What for some is freedom of conscience is for others simply confusion." Often we talk about these things as kind of struggles in our faith. But for a great part, they are also cultural struggles. So how in this situation, how can we grow in a spirituality that takes the cultural dimension of our humanness and of our faith seriously and makes it actually fruitful for a deeper understanding of ourselves, of God, and of being church? I have here two quotes by Pope Francis. Maybe you can read for yourselves, and the translators, meanwhile, will translate for you. What I want to highlight here is diversity can provoke in us the response of retreating into a rigid defense, says Pope Francis. A defense of our supposed identity. He doesn't say of our identity, but our supposed identity. Because the very presence of somebody who is different questions us. Why is he, she not like I am? And then in our dualistic mind, okay, one of us must be right and the other one must be wrong. It cannot be both. So, and then we defend what we think is our normal, rightful identity, how things should be. I don't like to be questioned. So, but our identity is not a given, something I possess. It is always, like he says in the second quote, it is a process. I cannot defend it as my possession that cannot change. So I would like to clarify with you the term intercultural. What is the difference between multicultural and intercultural? Now look at the picture. You see people in the metro or on a bus in London. Obviously, there are different ethnicities. I guess also different religions there. European descent from Asia. These people share the same space, sitting in the same bus, heading into the same direction. This is what you could call multicultural, the presence of diverse cultures in one space. But this is not intercultural because this, I mean, they are together, but they are not interacting. They are just there in the same place, but there's nothing happening between them. When they get off the bus, they will not have changed. They're just the same as before. Cultural anthropologists talk about the cultural bubble that comes quite natural to us. We are all born ethnocentrists. We like to see the world as we are used to. And we like to interact with people that are normal as we are, that speak the same language, have the same outlook on life, have the same worldview. You can see that everywhere, also here in the conference, of course. in the break at table, we sit together with those whose language we can speak. Maybe we share some past experiences together. This is our bubble where we feel safe, where we feel at home. But as long as we are in our bubble, we will not change. It is affirming our identity, the identity we are used to. Intercultural groups, communities, congregations, whatever, they are interacting. So it's not just multicultural, you are put together in one place and now you function as a multicultural group or team. No. Intercultural is more. It is the intentional and sustained interaction. That means you want to expose yourself to the other person with his or her different culture. And it is sustained interaction, not just for a cultural evening or for a one-day sharing, but for years, maybe. That's when you feel the pain. And in an intercultural community, everyone also allows to be affected by the presence of the other with his or her different culture. So it means not just a tolerance like, okay, you follow your culture, it's a good culture, I follow my culture, it's also good, I'm used to that. And we try to avoid conflicts. No, this is kind of this tolerance that creates, it's just avoidance of conflict. But intercultural means, no, I make myself vulnerable, I make myself open, I allow myself to be questioned by your presence. You are different. You see the world with different eyes. And I try to do the same. I try to place myself in your shoes. And when I get back into my shoes, maybe I too will see the world different from before. So interculturality is a process of transformation. If you lived or worked in a multicultural team and later you are the same as before, you were not an intercultural team, not an intercultural community. Intercultural will always leave a mark on you. You don't believe the same way, you don't live the same way. So if we use a theological concept, it's kenosis. Because we heard about spirituality is always a capacity, making space. So intercultural spirituality makes space for the other. Okay, before going to the next part of my presentation, which will look into Jesus and the early church and Jesus and the early church's intercultural experience, I want to give you just 5 minutes to turn to your neighbor as you sit here and just share with each other what of what I have said you can relate to? What is also your experience of intercultural encounters, the joy and the pain of it, the questions it has brought about for you? Just 5 minutes of sharing. di nuovo. Let us see how intercultural encounters transformed Jesus and also gave birth to the early church. There are many examples in the Bible. I selected only 2 or 3. There's the story of the encounter of Jesus with in Matthew it says Canaanite woman. In Mark it says the Syro-Phoenician woman. In any case, Canaanite or Syro-Phoenician, she is a pagan. She is the ethnically different, religiously different, and also the gendered other to Jesus. Jesus is a man, a Jew, what is it, Palestine. Jesus, encountering her, at first refused contact. Jesus did not say a word to her. And he limits his mission to his own people. When she begs to heal her daughter, Jesus says, I was sent only to the people of Israel, not to you. And then Jesus says, it is not right to take the food away from the children, that means the Jews, and feed it to the dogs, the pagans. So Jesus maintains this divide between Jews and pagans. And seemingly, Jesus believes that God's table is limited. There's only so much food, and that should be given to the children of God, the Jews, not to the dogs. So this is the traditional pattern of relating between a male Jew and a pagan woman. But now we see the woman breaking the pattern. In the story, she has no name. In Mark, she kind of just comes into the house where Jesus is and disturbs Jesus, who is resting. In Matthew, she shouts and thus annoys the disciples. She disrupts the routine of Jesus and his disciples. And she does not resign to the role that Jesus assigns to her. She does not take the insult for an insult. Jesus calls her a dog. But she very cleverly turns the argument against Jesus. She defeats Jesus with his own weapons, saying, yes, we are the dogs. And you know, the dogs feed from the same table as the children in every household. So she is telling Jesus, there is enough on God's table, enough for us all, whether Jew or pagan. So she becomes a prophet to Jesus. She broadens Jesus' image of God. And she also helps Jesus to better see his mission. Jesus believed his mission was limited to the Jews. And this woman teaches Jesus that his mission of God's mercy covers also the pagans. Another example from a different gospel, Gospel of John. You know well the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. Sorry, the interpreters, it's not in your text. I want to say somebody who knows, who is a Jew and knows scripture well, when he or she hears that a man and a woman meet at the well, and it's even Jacob's well, immediately it rings a bell. In this case, it rings the wedding bells. Because whenever in the Old Testament a man and a woman meet at the well, there's a wedding to come. Isaac and Rebecca and Rachel and Jacob. Think of these stories. The wedding started at the well. So what's the wedding here? The woman is surprised that Jesus speaks to her. She says, "You, a Jew, talk to me, a Samaritan." Samaritans were regarded worse than pagans because they kind of had left the true Jewish faith and had intermarried with Canaanites and had adopted some pagan features into Jewish religion. So they were the intimate enemies of the Jews. So the woman was scandalized that Jesus speaks to her, and the disciples were scandalized that Jesus spoke with that woman. And I imagine if the disciples had known that Jesus was having a theological conversation with the woman, they would have been even more scandalized. Because Jesus was not just talking about some small talk, but it was a highly theological discussion. Now, in this story, we usually focus on the living water. I will give you the living water. But this actually is not the climax of the story. When you look at the story, the climax is what comes after the living water, when it is about where and how to worship. So when the woman finally sees, "I see you are a prophet. I see you are the Messiah. So tell me, you Jews worship in Jerusalem. We worship, where was that? Garizim, thank you. Mount of Garizim. So what is the right place? Where and how to worship?" So that is the climax of the conversation. And, and then Jesus gives his famous answer. It's not about where to worship. It's about in what attitude, in what disposition you worship. It is about worship in spirit and in truth. So what Jesus does, he does a step beyond the antagonism, either or, right and wrong. And he says, neither here nor there, but transcend it, and you come to worship in spirit and in truth. Now, this is the marriage that any Jewish reader would have been waiting for, that in spirit and in truth, Jews and Samaritans find a higher unity beyond the antagonisms. There's also this part in the story where Jesus says, yeah, you have had 5 husbands, the 6th one is not yours. So when a reader hears about 6, automatically waiting for number 7. 7, fullness, completion. And who is that? The 7th husband. Well, right in front of the woman, it's Jesus. So in Jesus, the contradictions, enmities are transcended. So true intercultural encounters expand also our image of God. The Spirit moves us toward new spaces of encounter and dialogue, freedom and mission. Spaces of both and, where we are called to hold on to the questions and paradoxes of intercultural living. We heard it before in the talk on spirituality. It is about inhabiting spaces that seem not to be inhabitable, to go there. From Jesus, let's go to the early church. There's an interesting story in the Acts of the Apostles, Peter's dream. You know that, where this cloth comes down and Peter is told to eat impure animals. And Jesus, never, never, never. And 3rd time the voice says, well, what I have declared clean, you eat. Don't say it's unclean. This story is told right after the conversion of Paul. And so it's the story of the conversion of Peter. Paul had to broaden his faith, his strict Pharisaic faith, and had to make space for the freedom of Christ. And also Peter had to transcend his strict Jewish, culturally conditioned faith. The big question for the early Christian community was, is it possible for non-Jews to believe in Jesus Christ? Can they become part of the community of Christians? And if so, on what condition? And in the story of Peter's conversion, God declares the food laws that were the big cultural divide between Jews and the Gentiles. God declares them null and void. In the scene following Peter's dream, Peter then meets Cornelius, the Roman soldier, pagan. And then Peter realizes God's Spirit has been given also to pagans. God's Spirit knows no distinction between Jews and Gentiles, between races, religions, and cultures. So, and then he baptizes Cornelius and his household. So the same happens here as we saw in the previous story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. Here the apparent or seeming contradiction is, or kind of either or, either you are a Jew or you are a Gentile. And if you want to become a Christian, you must be a Jew, of course, because Jesus was a Jew. So you must stop being a Gentile and get circumcised, observe all the Jewish laws, then you can also follow Christ. But Peter makes a transcendent step and says, in the Spirit of Christ, we are one, Jews and Gentiles. Paul will later write actually, Paul was written, the letters of Paul were written earlier than the Acts of the Apostles, but Paul will write, in Christ, there are no more Jews and Gentiles, slave and free, men and women. In the Spirit, there is the higher inclusion. So the big question around the inclusion of Gentiles into the community of Jesus followers flared up again in Antioch. Antioch was the home base of Barnabas and Paul. And as you know, this conflict, like how, on what condition can the Gentiles be accepted into the Christian community? This conflict was formally resolved at the Council of Jerusalem. The council decided to acknowledge everyone as disciple of Jesus on the basis of their faith and not on the basis of Jewish culture and religion. If the Council of Jerusalem had decided differently, there would be today no worldwide Christianity. You wouldn't be sitting here today. Christians would have continued as a Jewish sect, and who knows, maybe died out. It is interesting to note that it was in Antioch that the Christians were first called Christians. Because in Antioch, people realized, hey, here is something new, something extraordinary. Here are Jews and Gentiles believing and living together in a new way. In Jerusalem, people didn't see that. In Jerusalem, the comment was, see how much they love each other. But that maybe was the difference in quality. But in Antioch, they realized it's more than just a better way of being a Jew. It's something new. It was the intercultural witness of the Christian community in Antioch that called people's attention. And that brought about the church as we know it. So true intercultural encounters lead to an inclusiveness that is brought about by the Spirit, not human-made, brought about by the Spirit. It's, yeah, intercultural encounter can lead to novelty, something that was not there before. In physics, they call it emergence. Like something new emerges. Maybe we know the ingredients, we know the laws of nature, but under certain conditions, something new can emerge that was not there before, and that we cannot predict it will happen. So in intercultural, real intercultural living, something new can happen, sociologically, but also spiritually. In a way, the Second Vatican Council repeated the Council of Jerusalem. It opened the church to more cultural inclusiveness. And so from a European Christianity, the church grew into a world Christianity. Again, as you have it there on the banner, make out of the world everyone's homeland. And what the Synod tries to do, make out of the church everyone's homeland. Okay, let me summarize. Interculturality, intercultural living is not a technique, something you learn in a workshop, some social skill, but it is a personal and communal process of transformation. Personal, because you must open yourself to it, but also the whole community must take part in it. Intercultural living is not so much for, okay, I let myself be enriched. It's nice to taste African food and to hear Bolivian music and to pray once in the whatever New Zealand way. But it goes much deeper. It means to transcend the diversity towards a higher inclusiveness, like we have seen in the examples. That is really something new. It's not just complementing each other, enriching each other, but allow the Spirit to create something new. And so it is not a process that we fabricate, engineer, but it is a Spirit-led creative process. Creative, where there is creation, there's always the Spirit. It is a Spirit-led process that asks our full collaboration. Doesn't happen without us. Okay, we pray and then God will do the rest. No, you have to do your full part and jump into it. Like Pope Francis says, get out into the streets, get your hands dirty. In intercultural living is a messy thing. There are no recipes. There is no roadmap. And that is really my point. Why do we do all this? Without intercultural living would be so much easier. And in fact, there are congregations that say, we don't do that. It takes us too much energy. They say, we prefer living in monocultural communities. We work with refugees, with migrants. We work in other countries, but we live with people of our own culture. Why? Because that preserves our energy for our work. Intercultural living sucks your energy. But so why should we do that? Well, I must say, because otherwise our God will always be limited. We can only see our God with the eyes of our culture. And if I stick forever to my culture, my image of God will always be limited to this culture. If I learn a new culture, I learn also, I encounter a new God. And in my view, that is our deepest motivation. You can call that conversion. I've come to the end of my presentation. There are still there's some literature, some resources you can use, but I leave the presentation with you, and you have it also on my handout. There you can see the books. Hagar the Horrible, for those of you who like Hagar the Horrible. I give him the last word. Now the word up to you.
Thank you, sisters. Grazie, grazie, Sor Anna. Allora, abbiamo avuto tempo prima di riflettere e di interagire. Adesso abbiamo ancora un po' di tempo se vogliamo presentare qualcuna delle nostre riflessioni o chiedere qualche cosa a Sor Anna dopo la sua presentazione.
Sister Anna, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm Father Carlos. I'm Portuguese. I'm living in Switzerland now. My question was regarding the notion of replacement. It goes a little bit after what Nacho said about a dominant culture who is going to have to open itself up to a different culture. And I think that you underlined how beautiful this encounter can be, the dialogue between cultures, but especially in my religious community, and probably also in society, I don't think that is the notion of encounter that is causing tension. I don't think that is the notion of dialogue which is causing fear. I think that it's the notion of replacement, because there is a process that we are living, and if we have two different groups and they meet up and they dialogue and they see the diversity, that can be a beautiful thing. But the process that I believe many congregations are living today is that there is one culture who is aware that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they are going to be replaced. And this is true also in society. I'm Portuguese. I think that the fear in Portuguese society is not of dialogue with other cultures, but is the fear that in 20 years from now, our culture is going to be irrelevant because other cultures are going to be the majority in our country. So I would like to ask you about this notion of replacement that generates fear, and how can we integrate that with the notion of a beautiful intercultural experience. Thank you.
Per facilitare le cose, mettetevi pure in fila.
io avevo una domanda che integra quella di Nacio, cioè nel processo di nel processo interculturale si vive questo processo in un ambiente particolare, in Italia, in Svizzera, in Germania, e lì c'è una cultura dominante. Ora, il processo interculturale riguarda quelli che vengono in questo ambiente, in questa cultura e devono inculturarsi, interagire con la nuova cultura, o il processo è per tutti e due? Cioè viene un gruppo in Italia che chiaramente deve inserirsi in questo contesto, in questa nuova cultura, ma anche la comunità ospitante deve aprirsi per interagire con i nuovi arrivati.
Padre Mario, trabajo en Roma. En la tua experiencia, ¿cuáles son los problemas que nos hace rechazar uno al otro sabiendo que tenemos el mismo dolor? Si tú te cortas sale la misma sangre, los mismos sentimientos y no logramos hacer relaciones, digamos, saludables entre culturas.
Giustamente tu hai detto che è nell'esperienza profonda che c'è l'unità, no? Il mio problema è forse quando noi pretendiamo l'unità attraverso la formulazione logica, non dividiamo le cose. Penso per esempio all'importanza che si dà al catechismo della Chiesa Cattolica. No, il catechismo è formulato con logiche, con categorie occidentali. Non divide questo, piuttosto che non è un'utopia quella di creare l'unità attraverso un'unità di logica, superare questa verità logica per trovare l'unità nell'esperienza profonda. Penso che è una sfida grande questa, no? Però capisco anche l'importanza di formulare, di capirci, però c'è una dialettica lì un po' difficile.
Allora, volevo veramente ringraziarla. Mi chiamo Agnese o Agnes, e sono figlia di migranti italiani, nata in Svizzera, a Basilea, e volevo veramente ringraziarla. Tanti input, c'è da riflettere, e volevo solo così, come feedback, dare un po' nome all'esperienza della seconda generazione a cui appartengo. E anche proprio il suo intervento aiuta a chiamare per nome l'esperienza di vivere non solo con persone provenienti da culture diverse, ma la seconda generazione fa l'esperienza di vivere questa frontiera, questa esperienza sulla propria pelle. E devo dire, la mia esperienza è stata proprio quella di chiedermi chi sono, no? A un certo punto, è bello ma anche faticoso a volte l'esperienza, chi sono svizzera, italiana, e in fondo sono tutte e due le cose, e questo dilemma, diciamo, iniziale mi ha provocato ad andare più in profondità e dire, ma in fondo non è il passaporto che mi collega con l'altro, la stessa lingua, la cultura, ma un'identità più profonda, quella di essere figli di Dio, che non è un modo di dire, ma una realtà da scoprire giorno per giorno, no? E proprio appunto mi ha aiutato a conoscere meglio Dio, chi è Dio, che è Padre, e chi sono io per Lui e chi è l'altro per Lui. Allora, come la seconda generazione un po' può vivere questo, scoprire questa identità che è dialogica, che apre, che mette in cammino, e così appunto questa trasformazione, no? E così volevo ringraziarla, e così anche un invito a
come dire, a aiutare la seconda generazione a scoprire le potenzialità, no? A volte di questo dilemma che può essere una chance, appunto un kairos. Grazie mille, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, sister. I believe your presentation helps me to I'm Dino. I'm a parish priest in Batam Island, Indonesia. I like the presentation, and I believe it helps me to go deeper into the reflection about this spirituality of ours. And I like especially the journey of Jesus, the incultural journey of Jesus, and the incultural journey of the early church. Especially, I try to combine both the conversion of Peter, what happened in the conversion of Peter. It was because of the encounter with the Gentiles, but also it is because the encounter with his confraters, converts, which has encountered the Gentiles. So in this reflection of spirituality, I see two sides of it. When we are speaking about our congregation and the people we are serving, there is that reflection of spirituality within our congregation, our communities, and how that spirituality to be brought to the context of the people we are serving. I'm interested in the reflection that you made about the encounter between Jesus and Samaritan woman. The disciples were shocked. You said the disciples would even shocked when they came to know that Jesus was talking in a highly theological discussion with this woman. They were shocked. And comparing it with the encounter between, or the conversion of Peter. So we saw the conversion of Peter was helped also by the encounter with his conquerors who have been encountered with other nationalities, other people. They are all Jews, no? Paul, Barnabas, but these two help Peter, I believe, in some sense. So in reflection about spirituality, how to deal with it, perhaps this presentation can be really a good reflection to go into our reflection on Scalabrinian spirituality within our communities and to the people that we are serving. Thank you. That's
Sono Sorana Paola e questa domanda viene da un contesto in cui anche vivo, in una comunità formativa che ogni anno arrivano delle nuove suore di diverse culture e parte da questa affermazione che lei ha fatto, i processi interculturali porta via tanta energia. Allora andiamo verso il dunque, come pensare una comunità o l'organizzazione della comunità in cui possa gestire queste energie, allo stesso tempo riesca a fare nei tempi che ce l'abbiamo di convivenza questo processo di trasformazione, perché è quello di 2, 3, 4 culture dobbiamo fare una quinta in una comunità. Allora, come possiamo fare, dalla tua esperienza, delle organizzazioni che favorisce questo processo di rispetto, ma di gestione anche di tanti conflitti che a volte intorno alla comunità avvengono? Grazie.
My name is Father Jose Juan. I'm coming from Mexico. And when you were speaking, the first thing that I thought is that mostly of us, we have the experience of living with peoples of different cultures. that many of us, we have the experience of living with different cultures, but not all not all of us experience in the same way, no? I want to share an experience with Dino. Dino is from Indonesia. I was in Indonesia, and he was remembering that the first time the vocational interview that he has, I just was able to make one question. And I remember that part of that is that I cannot speak the language well. And at the same is the experience of trying to think how to communicate what I want to say, but with the few words that I can say. And how to be able to understand what he want to say, even if I'm not able to understand him. And actually it's a kind of a risk, no? You have to trust in the other, and you have to trust in yourself. And sometimes the difficulty of that we cannot ask everyone to take the idea of interculturality in with the same way. There are many ways of understanding, no? And many ways of facing the difficulties of mingling with different cultures. And I think that is a very difficult process in the everyday life, not only in how to translate the contents that we have, but also how to understand and how to receive the gifts of the other. Thank you.
So my name is Father Dominicus from Indonesia, working in Brazil. It's really called my attention. It is really called my attention when were talking about this encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan women, and I can see that how experience can be source of spirituality, how encounter can be source of spirituality. But my question is, it is every encounter that we can build spirituality. There is a criteria that we see in encounter or in experience or in dialogue that we can build it up to be transcendence. Because for me, it is not about a dialogue. It's not about an experience. It's not about encounter, but how this encounter, we can transcend them to be this spirituality. Thank you.
Mi nombre es Marcio y soy de la provincia de San Carlos. Solamente para subrayar la importancia del diálogo, ¿no? Lo que usted decía. Interesante que Nostra Aetate en el Vaticano II decía sobre la semina verbi, la presencia del verbo en todas las culturas. Entonces, se presenta eso justamente para tener la apertura al diálogo, para decir que la espiritualidad es también una construcción. Asimismo, nuestra congregación, tal vez a 100 años atrás, nunca hubieran pensado que hoy estaríamos discutiendo diferentes culturas como estamos hoy. La espiritualidad a 100 años atrás era mucho más definida, tal vez era rezar el breviario con el rosario, tenía una otra identidad. Pero para tener esta cultura, perdón, para tener este diálogo, qué importante es la identidad. Solamente vamos a tener un real diálogo cuando realmente tenemos y nos conocemos a nosotros, ¿no? Entonces, así como con Jesús, que en el Evangelio tuvo diálogo, no hubo una imposición, ¿no? No hubo juxtas partes, pero diálogo donde cada uno sabía lo que era hasta llegar en un encuentro, en un diálogo. Entonces, qué importante es este diálogo, y para el diálogo que necesita esta identidad importante para nuestras culturas, y creando esta condición de posibilidad del diálogo, donde se ayudan a formar realmente comunidades de paz, no solamente de tolerancia, pero algo más deeper, de buena convivencia, donde se compartan y se crece juntos para tener esta experiencia de Dios. Gracias.
Sono Maurizio e la mia missione è in Bogotà, Colombia, nella teologia. E mi ha colpito la parola kenosis in relazione a questo dialogo interculturale e l'atteggiamento di Gesù che si mette a livello delle persone, anche se all'inizio dalla sua cultura parla in un modo che può essere duro, no? E quindi questa capacità e questa apertura che anche noi, guardando a Gesù, a Gesù Cristo, vedere come noi incarnarla, perché richiede un'apertura mentale e un'apertura spirituale, quindi una conversione. E credo che è uno sforzo di cui dobbiamo essere coscienti, perché quante volte i pregiudizi creano delle barriere tra di noi per le nostre diversità, i nostri concetti e a volte anche impediscono questa interazione feconda, profonda, questa apertura. Quindi c'è uno sforzo mentale, c'è un'apertura mentale, ma poi anche una conversione del cuore. E poi anche, se la viviamo noi, poterla comunicare con gli emigranti, perché ci troviamo di fronte a emigranti che si sono stabiliti nella nuova patria, nella nuova nazione, che molte volte si chiudono completamente all'apertura di altri emigranti che vivono la stessa necessità, anche più drammatica, e cercano uno spazio.
My name is Father Ronan. I'm Filipino chaplain here in Rome. Actually, my name is Father Ronan. I'm Filipino chaplain here in Rome. Actually, I would like to start my question as I would like to ask a suggestion from you. There's a famous expression in Italian, probably. If you are here in Rome, be like a Roman. So it's a kind of expression that does it mean that we need to change or to change our culture? How about our identity? Like example, I'm a Filipino. I like to eat rice. Here in Rome, they like to eat pasta. So how would you consider these differences without transforming me like a Roman because I'm a Filipino? So it's like a kind of challenge for this intercultural spirituality. How about our identity without losing our identity? Thank you.
Bene, penso che finiamo qui perché abbiamo ricevuto già molti input. Soranna, if you want to give some kind of reaction.
It's good that you started talking about food because we are close to lunchtime. Yeah, we have in our general, our sister, the cook is Filipina. So I know what you are talking about. We have rice every day. Thank you for your sharings, really, and also for your insightful questions. I cannot answer them all by lack of time. I want to pick out some comments you made and also questions. There was, for example, about replacement, like one culture, one generation replaces the other, dominant culture. Or you said, how can we preserve our identity? Sometimes when I have workshops and questions come up, yeah, culture, what is actually my culture? I make people share, okay, how did your grandfather or your grandmother live? Remember their lives, what you remember. How did they go to school? Did they travel? What work did they do? What did they eat? All these things. And then you compare to your life. Do you live the same culture? You are maybe from the same country, maybe the same place, city or village, but your life is so different. So what is Portuguese culture, Canadian culture? What is it? Culture is not something that you can preserve. Your cultural identity, you cannot preserve in the sense of, I don't want it to change. Culture, by definition, it is a culture is a system of meaning, of symbolic interaction. So it will always change. You will always change. And in reality, you want to. That's why you pray. That's why you go to conferences. That's why you entered the Scalabrini order, because you want to change. You want to develop in your life. So there was also the question about new members coming in, new cultures coming in, people arriving here in Rome. To put it into a scheme, you could say there are three options. Let's say there's a group, and now new people try to join that group. Your congregation, migrants coming to Italy. So the dominant culture, the dominant group can say, no, no strange people among us, because they will change us and we don't want it. They are a threat to our identity. We want to preserve our culture and our identity, so they close themselves. One option. It is not a morally evil option. I don't think it's a very good option, but it is not morally evil. It's legitimate. For example, Japan decided that for many decades they closed themselves. India in some way is doing now. Very hard to enter as a foreigner. So that's one option. We shut ourselves off so that others do not change our identity. Second option, we allow for the presence of others. And we coexist with them. Sometimes congregations do that. You accept new members and you notice, wow, they're different, other generation. So we allow them to express themselves, but we don't allow them to change us. There's a tolerance. For example, as a provincial council, as a general council, you can say, okay, we must listen also to the younger ones. And then you invite them to share their experience. And then you say, thank you. And now we make the decision. This is now also disputed in the synodal way. Laity are included in the synod. May they also kind of in the end decide, or may even the bishops decide, or only the Pope. So this is kind of this tolerance and coexistence. You may be among us, Filipinos may live here in Rome, but please don't change our pasta. No, it's really not about food, it's about deeper things. So we please respect us. You are the newcomer, so you have chosen to enter our congregation, so respect our ways. The third option, sometimes called the radical welcome, is that you allow others to join you and to change you. And this is really an adventure. It's a risk. And that's why it is painful. It is not just let's have a dialogue and talk and then come to a common understanding and then enlightened we separate again. No, because our cultural identity goes very deep. If we allow that to be changed or to develop, this is a painful process. Like every birth is a painful process. And somebody asked how to do that. Yeah, I think you cannot plan it because really it is a spirit-led, spirit-engineered process, and it's you can only open yourself to it. I think this is what you can do. Yeah, but you cannot make it. I think you can create spaces for that, for intercultural encounters, intergenerational encounters. That must be open spaces where not one party dictates the rules thus far, and then we, dominant group or culture, will take again the reins in our hands. If you do like that, it goes back to coexistence. It is not real radical welcome. That is the kairos. Somebody spoke about encounters. How can I make an encounter fruitful, that it really becomes a spiritual encounter, not just oh, nice that we met, goodbye. Also that you cannot make it. Sometimes it happens. I mean, you know it from your life. They are kind of this kairos, this in German we call it Sternstunden. Suddenly something happens and you feel there's grace in this encounter. It's not just me and the other person. God entered our encounter. Again, openness is the only thing you can do. Yeah. Maybe the most important thing I want to invite you to is to say goodbye to the concept, I have my culture. No. You grew up in a culture. You are shaped and formed by a culture, but you have continuously developed. And so also you don't have your identity. I think you share, at least on some days, my experience that you wake up, go to the bathroom, look into the mirror, and ask yourself, who on earth is that? Because we, if we are really attentive to ourselves, we remain an enigma to ourselves, a mystery to ourselves. So we don't have ourselves. We don't possess our cultural self, our identity. It is, if you know process theology, I really like it. We are a process. We are not a human being. We are a human becoming. And so it is with our identity, with our culture. if you think of it like that, the fear will not so easily creep in that somebody changes my identity. Bene. Grazie. Thank you. You have been a very attentive and engaged group, engaged and engaging.
Thank you, sister, for your presentation. We had a morning in which we addressed two issues: what is spirituality, and how do we think of intercultural spirituality? Well, all this is going to be food for thought, but now we have to think of the other food, and so we better go for lunch. Thank you again very much, and please, we can go.